Welcome in, everyone, to a very special episode of American Joyride. Not only is it a special episode, we are welcoming today Jaclyn Jax Scott. She is a former member of the Army CST Cultural Support Team, and she is the inspiration behind the Jax Act. She's also the first woman to ever appear on the show after a long line of male operators. I could not be happier to speak with her. Jax, thank you very much for joining us today.
I'm excited to be here. And wow, the first woman, a lot of pressure now. The pressure is on.
Well, hey, I'm not going to put pressure on you or not. You interpret that as how you want. Like I said, we've had a lot of dudes, but I thought it was important to shine a light on a different part of the special operations world. And it was important for the audience to know that, hey, there's a lot of badass women out there too. I'm like, let's go get a woman from the CST. A mutual contact put me in contact with your people. Here we are today. So right from the jump, can you explain how you ended up in the military and then how that leads to being in the cultural support team?
Yeah. So, oh my gosh, like my journey into the military was definitely not one of those where I was, a young kid and I had a whole bunch of family members that had been in the military. I was actually like a country kid, was homeschooled. I don't like to tell too many people that. No, I actually love the thought of being homeschooled because it was before electronics and internet and all of those things. I think the dot-com was starting right around then, and now I'm really aging myself. So there was a lot of outdoor activities. I lived on 48 acres as a kid. Think about that. Like a lot of people had dogs. I had a horse and I rode horses, jumped horses, and I had two brothers. And so it was all about, talk about resilience as a kid. Like if we got in trouble, my mother, I remember one night, we were not sleeping. So she brought us into the living room. We had to stand against the wall and we had to put our arms directly out in front of us. And we had to hold them out there and we weren't allowed to drop them. And that was how I was raised, is like boot camp style 101 from like a really young age. And so when I did finally go to school, it was about middle school. I was all about sports. I wanted to play all the sports that were possible. I was very much a tomboy. And I was like freakishly strong. Like when I say freakishly strong, I would just go into the gym. And at first they were just like, the guys would be like, hey, let's see her do a leg press of like whatever weight. And I would always out press the guys. But I didn't, it wasn't like I was comprehending what was going on. It was more of a joke and, oh yeah, I can lift all this weight. Well, I didn't realize as I got older that was going to be such a great skill to have when I entered my early 20s. And I was actually, again, not planning to go into the military. I was about 20 years old, hadn't joined, and I was running my own company. I was an entrepreneur. I had my own perfume business. And with how I was raised, I really didn't have a lot of structure. Like school wasn't a priority. We weren't raised in like a really like loving home, you would say. It wasn't, it was the life that we had. So it was pretty rough around the edges. And I subconsciously, I think I was needing structure and I wanted something better in my life. And I tell people that I knew at that time that I was just going down a really bad path. And so it was either going to probably be, I was going to be either dead or in prison. So I joined the military, long story short. And at that time, women weren't allowed in combat roles. And I went to pretty much every recruiter. And I walked in, I was like, I want to be in the hardest thing possible. And I remember they would all just look at me like I was crazy, first off. And then the Navy, I remember walking into the Navy and they were like, well, you can be a rescue diver, because I think women at that time could be rescue divers, but not a big fan of water. I'm not afraid of it. I'm not like, let's go jump in water. So when they said that, I remember standing there, I was like, that just sounds terrible. So I finally made it to the Army. Joined. They were the first. I always say they were the first branch that lied to me, and I believe them. So joined the Army with all these hopes to go to all these cool schools, which eventually I managed to do it. But that was like kind of my trajectory into the military. It was nothing that was like fully planned out, but I knew I wanted to physically challenge myself.
That's fascinating. So when you go into the Army and you say, I want to do whatever the toughest thing you guys got to do they tell you right at that point, like, we had this thing called CST, or did you get identified later in basic training when they're like, okay, this woman physically has some attributes that we could pull for? I mean, how did you get on that path?
So I joined the military in 2004, really dating myself now. And the CST program had not actually been formalized and put into action until about 2010. So it was a whole, like almost, what is that, rough math, like 7 years later. So nobody even knew about it. It wasn't even an inception, an idea for Special Operations Command to even establish this program. And the war on terrorism had just really kicked off at that time too. So at that time, I was still like super gung-ho. I was maxing all my PT scores. I wanted to go to airborne school and air assault, and I had to fight to go to any of those schools. So I finally got into I remember getting into air assault school, getting into rappel master school, which was like sought after, really hard for you to get into if you weren't in a specific unit that allowed that. So I remember I had to do all this recruiting, because they were doing, like, if you recruit 5 people, for example, in like a short period of time, you could get a seat to go to the school. Well, I did that, and then I wasn't allowed to go to airborne school. So then I fought, took it to like the general officer, did it again. They finally let me go to air assault school. And then they were like, okay, she's not too bad. She can pass this school. Maybe we'll send her to rappel master school. And then they sent me to a fitness course. They actually sent me to CrossFit level 2. And all of this was transpiring during this time. And I was just staying at this high level of elite fitness. And at that time, it was probably 2010. That's when I got approached. I was in the Colorado Guard at the time. And I got approached by a chaplain who was a friend of mine, a lieutenant. And he had this poster that they had sent out. I didn't even see it. And he walked up to me and he's like, it has your name all over it. Like, you need to do this. You need to apply. And it was this whole very like robust paper interview. You had to actually go and take, I think they quit doing this later on, but we were the first group of like formalized women to go through. It's called CST2. You had to go take your math and English, like a baseline test. You had to get a certain score on it. So you had your ASVAB, but you had to go take another one. You had to pass with a certain PT standard. And then you had to submit this huge packet, like a paper interview process, basically. And then if you passed that, then they called you to Fort Bragg, where then you went through the actual physical, like 2 to 3 weeks at Camp McCoy, where you went out and you had fun for, a few weeks doing what they called like a mini selection course. And then once you went through that, then you would go, if you got selected then, because sometimes you weren't selected, even if you passed it, you still could get cut at the very end. If you made it through that, then you were brought back again for another 2 or 3 months of cultural training before you even deployed out at that time.
I was actually just going to ask, did they send you to Fort Bragg initially?
Yeah.
Because that's for viewers who might not know, that's the headquarters, right, of the Special Operations Command?
Yes, that is. That's where, they've got, Delta there, the Green Berets there. It's the main headquarters of a lot of things that for the train up, because you've got the training hall there for Special Operations Command and everything. And that's where we were located. We lived and breathed within that space and worked primarily with 3rd Special Forces Group out there. They were the TRADOC that was basically training us during that time was 3rd Special Forces Group. So they were doing our combatives training and all of our PT in the morning, road marching. We were learning how to train up on night vision goggles and all of it, everything you can imagine. It was a wild time.
Well, and we're going to dive into that in a second. Before we dive into that, did they make a pitch to you? Like when they bring you this poster and you're like, okay, this seems like my speed, and you sit down with the people making the decision, are they pitching you or are you pitching them for the opportunity to give this a try? Who's pitching who to go?
That's a great question. So putting it in perspective for everyone listening, because up to this point, women were really suppressed in the military. And there were so many women like myself that were these high achieving women that were just extremely successful. And they had this like physical being about them that they could do so much more, but we weren't being given the opportunity. So having that flyer go out, they really didn't have to pitch us. They initially did a voluntel. So how this all transpired, just to give some context around the CST program, at the time we had, the war in Afghanistan going on, and we were gathering information off of the Afghans, and it was primarily being done by ODAs. and these ODAs, 12 and 15 man special ops teams. And just to clarify, this could include like Army Rangers going out there, Special Forces, Green Berets, Navy SEALs, Marine MARSOCs. They were going out there, they were gathering intelligence, but they were not able to, the male operators were not able to speak to women and children. So General McChrystal at the time, he saw this big intel gap and was like, we need to tap into 50% of the population, the women and children. How do we do that? So that is how this all transpired, is like, let's train women up to go and embed with these operators that are already out there to help support them and get that information that we're not getting right now and complete that intel picture. And so in 2010, they did kind of a volunteer, and they just took women that were in special ops and were like, you're going to go out and be part of this mission. And then when we were recruited, it was basically a poster. And I am telling you, when I tell you women came out from all corners of the world, that is literally what happened. I met a woman because we had to remove our rank while we were at the Corps. So I remember being in a night road march, was like an unidentified distance. I think it was 13 or 14 miles, and you can't talk. And there was this one female that was walking next to me, and she was so thirsty, and she was like whispering, and she's like, do you have some water? So I share it with her. We talk a little bit, and she's like, I flew in from Kuwait. She was deployed. She saw the opportunity. She was like, I want to go home early. She literally flew in from Kuwait and went directly into the selection process. And there were active duty, there were National Guard, there were women from all over that came together. So the problem wasn't finding the women, because all of us wanted to do this. Like, a lot of us, it was like, this is our opportunity to really shine and see what we're worth. And so it was really, they actually had to cut it off because they had so many women that wanted to participate in the program.
And did they tell you point blank, if you get through this training and when you get overseas, you're gonna be on target? Like, you're gonna be places where bullets are flying. Like, was it made crystal clear the risks you were signing up for?
Not entirely. I actually just talked to a CST like 2 weeks ago about this. So we had two different missions. We had the Ranger mission, which was very much direct action. So they worked primarily at night. They would go in with the Rangers, go on target, guns a-blazing, get back on the helicopters and fly out. Or you could have the village stability operations with the Green Berets, the Army Green Berets, Special Forces. And that was, you lived and breathed, and you were in the village. Some of them, I got to do direct action as well as VSO, but a lot of them did just VSO. It was a mixed bag. So this woman that I talked to, she was a Ranger, and she worked with the Rangers. And she told me, she's like, I just wish they had better prepared us for what we were going to be doing, because it was kind of sold to us that we would be going in, but almost in a separate capacity. Like, the Rangers would go in, they would clear. And then she's like, we had this thought that we were going to like fly in on a separate helicopter and then like land and then go and clear. And she's like, what I realized is when we did our first mission, it was nothing like what we expected. And that was kind of across the board. Is like, we were very prepared as far as training, and as much as we could be as far as like training and being prepared for being in combat. But I think because the program was so new, it was very hard to really articulate exactly what we were going to be doing, at least for those first couple of rotations. Because I think she was like CST 3 or 4. So it was still very infant stages. But yeah, she said, I was absolutely shocked when I realized once we got on ground and we're literally with the Rangers and they're going in and we're right behind them. And that's how it was with us as well. It was like, we were with the 3rd Kandak Commandos, Afghan commandos, that because we would train them up and everything. And then they would go in the compound and then we would follow right behind them. So you were like in the mix, but we didn't train like that. It's just, you just don't know what you don't know until it like happens. And you're like, this is real. This is really happening. We're not in training environment anymore.
So let's get into the training real quick, and then we're going to dive right back into the chaos you're just talking about there. When we bring guys on this show from the unit, the Rangers, the SEALs, they talk about, they train heavy on like CQB, sniper activities, surveillance, things of that nature. You're coming in a cultural support role, but doing very elite training. So in what ways is your training similar to what a guy in special forces might be doing? And how is it different? I mean, are you doing CQB? Are you learning explosives? You said you were trained on night vision. So take the audience through what you trained for.
So the training, it was much shorter. I mean, the guys go through months and months of training. So making that very clear, we knew that our training was extremely condensed as far as the physical demanding part of the training. We did go through CQB. We went through CQB not only like in the United States, but then when we actually flew over, if I remember correctly, I think we were there for like 2 weeks and we went back through range training and CQB training. One of the areas that they really emphasized on was our range training. So they really worked with us for our pistol, like being able to draw from the holster, be effective with the pistol, but also rifle. But like working a pistol, if you're in close quarter combat, you may be able to use your rifle. But in our situation, a lot of times, like I might have my rifle across, but I'm going to have a notebook out. I'm going to have a pen. I'm going to be taking questions. And if you're really close to individuals, which I was a lot of the time, more than likely, I'm going to pull my pistol before I'm going to pull my rifle. So they taught us transitioning drills. They taught us like moving in a vehicle, getting out of a vehicle, shooting with your rifle across. They covered so much with us. And then what was great is depending on who you were embedded with, when you went down range, you did more training in country with your team. Like we would do these trainings in the States where they would do stress drills. So what they would do is to put you a team of 4 or 5. They would make you like carry kettlebells, like sprints back and forth, come back, climb a rope, go back down, then sit down, do a mathematical equation really quick, get up, run around, carry this, do that, then sit down, put these little like things that measured your heart rate on your ear to like see how quickly you could drop your heart rate and answer questions. And so they were putting us through all of this. So when we were in a stressful situation, when we did need to shoot our firearm, you were able to like control the trigger squeeze, and still be able to operate and think clearly, relatively clearly, when you're in this high state of stress. So yeah, we went through, and that was during like the 2-month course. And then our actual like physical training, we did a lot of what the males did, like carrying apparatuses, ruck marching for an unidentified distance, working in a buddy team, doing obstacle courses, running an unidentified distance. Like there was a lot of unidentified distance where they would literally just take you out there and they would say, follow the cones. And you don't know, it could be 7 miles, it could be 2 miles, it could be 15. You just had to run and like keep running, keep running, hope it ends. It'll eventually end. So a lot of it was similar, absolutely, but it was very, very condensed. And they also put us through like psychological evaluations, all of that stuff, just to make sure we lost some women during all of that process too, because they obviously want to make sure that you're okay up here to be able to go out there and function.
And then when you go to like the cultural training side of it, what are they teaching you to do with the women you come across? What are like the tips and advice they're giving you for dealing with the local population?
Yeah, so that was what was really interesting based on, and this is from my personal experience. So we went through a lot of what we call scenario-based training, and they did that by bringing in actors, and we did the cultural training. So we had individuals that were from Afghanistan that would come in and teach our class to allow us to kind of have a better understanding of the culture and the religion and the just general norms. So we wouldn't be disrespecting them, not knowing. So that was really important. But then we would have these situational based trainings where we would go into an environment and we would have an interpreter, and we would get used to working with an interpreter, because it is different when you're doing translation and having to pause and making sure you simplify what you're saying. But I will tell you, my very first mission, all of that training was like out the window almost, because we were supposed to go to a shura, like this meeting, and all of a sudden, as I arrived with my interpreter, like shots are fired at one of the checkpoints, like 2 people are killed. Let's get in the vehicles and head out. And I was like, oh, this just went from my very first meeting of just chilling out, drinking some chai, to like things are happening. So we drive there. They initially just keep me in the vehicle because it's kind of like, this is such a new program. They're like, just leave her in the vehicle. And I didn't think I was going to go. I was like, great, I'm just going to stay in this vehicle for the rest of my life. So like an hour or two passes, and then I'm listening to the radio, and then they're like, go get the CST. We need to get the CST over here. So that I'm like, oh my gosh, like Cindy coach, I'm super excited, but I'm nervous because it's like shots are getting fired. It's a little bit crazy. So they come and get me, and I walk over there with my interpreter. And the reason they had pulled me over there is because the women were hiding the man. He was hiding behind the women, and they couldn't obviously touch the women. They couldn't do anything about it. And so I was able to get in there and get the women to move and get the individual that they were trying to get to out from behind the women. But where everything kind of went out the window for me is that a lot of the training we had been receiving was kind of like very kind and like talking to them. Hi, how are you guys doing? How can I help you? Please move. Like all of these nice gestures. But that was not the first situation I had. The women went psycho. They started running around the compound screaming. One of them started attacking one of the ODA members. And I'm like, this is not what I learned. Like, what do I do right now? So I look at my interpreter. This one woman is screaming nonsense in the corner. Like, you can just imagine there's like 5 women doing this right now in the compound. The ODA, and I'm feeling like, oh my God, I have to get this under like wraps. This is my first mission. The ODA guys are like, what is happening? I look at my interpreter. I'm like, what is she saying? And she's like, nothing. She's just screaming. But it sounded like she was speaking in tongues. This woman's attacking the ODA guy. So then I just kind of like snapped into it. I was like, something has to change. So I looked at whoever the ring woman was, which I could tell was this one woman. And I just walked over and I just zip tied her hands behind her back. And I like pushed her to the ground as nicely as possible. And all the other women just kind of stopped. And then I just told my interpreter, I was like, we've got to get these women controlled. I need you to tell them to come over to this corner, like get them into this room. But I had to get super, super aggressive. But I learned very, very, very quickly that that is how that culture was and is, because that is what they've been around. A lot of those women have been in abusive environments. And I can tell you countless times I walked into a compound, and as soon as I walked in, the women were already going crazy and running around. And had I not been more aggressive, had I tried the, hi, how are you? Let's talk about this, you would have never been able to gain control of the situation. So that was something that I learned very, very early on. That was something that I didn't feel I had properly been trained for when the situation arose. And it was a little crazy.
So going forward from that point on, were you much more aggressive from the jump when you'd get on target?
Absolutely. I noticed that, especially when I was doing the direct action operations and we would go in at night, they were a little more agile at night, but I could tell you countless. I had a woman that she looked 65 years old and she jumped over a fence, like one of their wall. And I had to go chasing after her after she had just come out of a compound that had just blown up. And so she was our eyewitness. And so I learned very early on, and I noticed that if you walked into the room, they actually respected you. From my opinion, I walked in and I wasn't rude. I wasn't disrespectful. I just had a commanding voice, and I didn't allow them an opportunity to be able to go crazy and run around or take advantage of the situation. I had a very command presence. I had to take quick control of the situation. And if I did that in the right way, which typically I did, I could keep them all in order and keep them quiet and keep them well behaved in like a corner room. But I had to learn it extremely early on. But you still had those situations where there would always be that one woman that led the entire like compound, and she would get, I saw all kinds of things like ripping clothes off and just getting wild and crazy. And you just have to maintain composure too. You have to, you can't let it bother you, because I feel like if you let it bother you, they can see that, they can sense it. And then you start losing more and more control of the situation.
Well, what happens, because I'm curious now, when you're embedded with, whether it's the Rangers or a Green Beret ODA team, if you get on target, you guys take contact from the jump. Maybe they're shooting at the helicopters coming in. Maybe there's rockets coming to you, whatever it might be. You're coming in a compound. How do you know that the women aren't going to pick up guns and start shooting too, or that they're not going to clack off a suicide vest?
Yeah, you don't. You don't know that at all. I can tell you, I never fortunately had to get into a situation where we dealt with a woman that had a vest or that had picked up a weapon. But that one woman I was telling you about that ran, the compound had just exploded. She comes running out. So you're just like, where did you come from? Why are you leaving this compound? And so she was extremely aggressive when I got her, obviously. I mean, we're in her, and I always had everything in perspective. I mean, we're in your village right now, and in a way, we're your enemy. So I always took that into consideration. But yeah, you were always like, I always very much respected their culture, respected their home. But at the same time, you had to be on a defense, not knowing if they could pick up a weapon because you wouldn't have ever thought. And I remember hearing about intel reports of this definitely happening where the Taliban, at that time it was the Taliban, were leveraging women to wear SVAS or leveraging women to teaching them how to shoot weapons and leveraging them as a way to attack the U.S. as we were there. Yeah.
Oh, it's just, I can't imagine the chaos. When you first get on target, that first one, like you said, there's already been 2 people shot at a checkpoint. I'm sure you're nervous as hell. But was there any part of you that was like, this is nuts in a positive way?
Yeah, of course. I know I think that's what makes some of us in the SOCOM community probably a little crazy is like, we signed up for this. We thrive in this environment. And it's like, even though I was very nervous in the vehicle and getting out, I wanted to get out. Like, I was like, send me out, coach. Let's do this. Like, I'm ready to go. I've been training all my life for this. Like, I'm ready to do this. And yeah, you got to be a little crazy to be like knowing that there's literally, I could look out the vehicle window. I remember looking out the vehicle window and seeing the 2 dead bodies just laying there. And you would think most people would be like, I'm not going out there. But I'm like, let's go. Like, as soon as they called me up, I was like antsy and ready to get out because I'm like, here's my opportunity to shine. Yeah.
Is there any moment from your career that really sticks out to you where you're like, that was about as close of a close call as you could possibly get? Like one where you thought, man, we're lucky we got out of that situation unscathed?
Yeah, there would probably be 2 actually, but my very first, so I was doing village stability operations for my first deployment, and we did a redeploy. So
are all your deployments in Afghanistan? I forgot to ask that. Okay, so they're all in Afghanistan. Go on.
Yeah, all the combat deployments are in Afghanistan. So we did a redeploy, and I had made a really good reputation for myself in northern Afghanistan. I had moved around to a few different ODAs with my team member, and while I was moving around, there were a couple of times that I didn't have an interpreter with me. So I made the best out of the situation. I went to the Boglan University. I built an aquaponics machine because I figured they would speak English. They did. And so I started building relationships with all of these Afghans in the various different areas. And when I did that, the AOB, the main headquarters at the time of the area, had gotten wind of me. And when they were doing a redeployment, there were a few CSTs that were allowed to stay in country and basically do a second deployment on ground. And when that happened, that was when I got the call from a chief over at the AOB. And he's like, hey, I've heard about what you're doing in the space. I would love to be able to have you support our direct action operation that we have in northern Afghanistan. It supports all of these provinces. Would you be open to do that? And I'm like, absolutely. So then fast forward, our first operation that we're going on, I think it was supposed to just be like a 12-hour operation. Like, we land at night. We did most of our operations at night. We get land at one side of the village, clear the village, get on the helo, leave. Perfect world situation, right? And we were looking for a high-value individual. That was our plan. Well, that is not what happened. And what had happened, if I remember correctly, we believe that a tip had been given that we were coming into the village, because as soon as we landed, shots fired, and everything from that point on was just fireworks for the next 12 plus hours. We were just under fire. And that was there was a time I was actually talking to my commander, and we were looking at each other. And at this time we had all these military age males, these MAMs. We had hundreds of them because we were just rounding them up as we went along, because if you let them go, you don't know if they would go get firearms or a weapons cache and attack us. So we just as we went through the village, we just kept wrapping up more and more mams. And at the time, because I did not have the credibility, so I was in the C2 element, which is kind of a little bit further back with the commander, and he's communicating with aircraft above and everything like that. And then you have in the front, you have what we call as main elements, basically the forward shooters. So this was my first combat mission, direct action, and we're under fire, and he and I are talking, and I'm looking at him, and he's like, I don't know what to do, like these males, and we're just talking, and then all of a sudden, the shots are fired. They've been going off this entire time, but the rounds hit the wall that we were at, and the rocks hit our faces. And so that's when we ducked, and he's like 6'7", really tall dude, so, he's easily noticeable. But as we jumped down, I just remember him going, whoa. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, I'm going to go that way with the mams. And I'm like, cool, I'm going to go around you, which was the front where everything was happening. And I'm like, I'm going to go this way. And figured, go up there, lay some fire, do our thing. But I think that was the moment of like, yeah, this is some real shit. Like, this is really happening. We almost got shot. You could hear the singing and the popping as we were standing there talking. And then that was the moment where it was like, okay, that's where we need to get down. That's where we were throwing grenades. I mean, we actually ran almost completely out of ammunition because we were taking so much fire. We had lost a couple of people on that mission. We weren't even able to medevac them out because the medevac couldn't even come in because we were taking so much fire. And we were actually waiting for everything to kind of calm down. And we were just sitting against the wall as rounds are just coming over our head. And me and my commander were just sitting there and just rounds are just flying over. And you're literally just kind of joking because of the situation. You're just like, because nobody can move. The main elements are stuck. We're all just kind of sitting there because, like, what do you do at this point in time? So that was kind of, I was still not like, I had a respect of the situation, but I definitely wasn't sitting there going, oh my God, I'm so scared. I was just like, this is where I'm supposed to be. I know that sounds super weird. This is where I'm supposed to be as bullets are flying over my head. Yeah.
You literally answered my follow-up question about whether or not you were scared, because it's funny you say, I hear that exact same thing from so many of your male counterparts. I know some guys, I've interviewed some guys that were in Black Hawk Down, always ask me, you must have been terrified. And they all say the exact same thing. There's no time to be terrified. Like, you're not even thinking about what you're feeling when you're being shot at and your friends are getting killed. And that, to me, is someone who has never come anywhere close to a situation like that is mind-boggling. That there's people like you and other individuals that you're not, I would be panicking. I'd be freaking out. At least I think I would be. I don't know. You don't know, but right. I think I would be. I do want to transition a little bit into kind of some of the stereotypes that some people might have. Right off the bat, did you face any trouble when you first got over there with the guys you were working with, or did they accept you pretty much arms wide open?
So it's about a 50-50. Like, I will tell you across the board, again, looking at perspective and taking a step back and understanding like how the SF culture was. Like, this is a boys' club. It's been this way for a long time. These women are coming into their space, and I understand that, respect that. And I will tell you that across the board, it was very professional. Now, there were situations that I worked with 7 different ODAs out there, and some of that was because they liked us. Some of that was because we got, as soon as they did a RIP and a new group was coming in, we got kicked off the compound 2 hours after they landed because they did not want to work with the women. Now, that happened. Like, you definitely got some of those leaders that I had that leader that looked at me and said, I'm only going to take, because we are a 2-man team, I'm only going to take one of you on this mission because I need an actual shooter and you're taking a seat. Or, I heard you don't, which I always thought this was weird. We're going to go train, but you guys don't get to go train with us because you're chicks. But the like EOD guys and, CA guys could go out there, but just because we are women, they didn't want to train us, because there was always, like, that's the thing about being an SF is selection never ends. They were always training, and you had that. But I will tell you, across the board, especially with my DA team, so my direct action team, when I embedded with them, oh my gosh, they like opened up their arms to me. They were so excited to have me. They gave me my own room, which was kind of nice. And they were just like, we're so excited to have you here. The commander was one of the most professional people. We're still good friends today that you could have asked for. Like, extremely professional, the entire team, and they became my brothers. We lived together. I did not leave them for like 8 months. We did everything together. And it got to the point that even when my partner, she tore both of her MCLs on a mission. And for the next like 6 months, I did operations with me and my interpreter. And there was a requirement, I'm doing air quotes, that you needed 2 CSTs. And I remember my commander's like, well, we've got combat camera. She's a woman and she's doing good. So now we've got, so you've got another woman. You'll be fine. If anybody has issues, it'll be fine. And that, because they trusted me and I was able to work with their intel guy. And so I started, eventually I was in main element going forward. Every operation I was in main element. I was no longer in the C2. And it was one of the most amazing experiences across the board. But yeah, there were definitely challenges, but I think all in all, the credibility, and they saw the impact that we had, they were extremely professional.
So I want to give you the opportunity to kind of address people watching this who might have very strong opinions about women in combat. And I'm gonna buffer with, I've heard some guys, and I won't say their name on air, from the unit, from Delta Force, who speak unbelievably highly of some of the women they've worked with. They have not spoken to what role they worked with them, so I can't speak that, but they praise the hell out of some of the women they've worked with. I've heard other people, not from that unit, who have taken much harsher approaches. I'm going to give you the arguments they would give, not my words, and I want you to kind of respond to them. They would argue they're not as good as shooters as us. They're not as well tailored as combat for us. They're not as strong as us. And as soon as bullets start flying, they either freeze up or I have to worry about people stopping what they're doing to go look at them. There's civilians who feel that way. There's people in the military who feel that way. I'm not saying I feel that way, for the record. What would you say to someone who holds those views?
So there's probably a reason why they're saying that. Maybe they've experienced, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt that maybe they had like seen a woman do that in those positions. I will tell you firsthand experience. I was forced, it's a very long story, but I was forced to work with an untrained woman who was not a CST on an operation. I don't know still to this day why I was tasked, but they were like, hey, she's going to fly in from 3rd Battalion or whatever, 3rd ID, and she's going to go on op. And she froze up, and she was terrible, and she left her weapon, and she did some of the things that you're talking about. However, the CSTs who were trained, who were efficient, who were effective, that didn't happen. Now, could that have happened? Were there CSTs that left a firearm? Were there CSTs that probably froze up? Absolutely. But are there males that do that exact same thing? Yes. But I think that a lot of times, since the focus is so much more narrow, being that there's so few of us, when there's one woman that does it, it's like it's exasperated into all women are this way. And I think out of everything you said, -1, I think out of everything you said, it can be trained. Weapons and firearms training you can train to a high proficiency. As far as moving, shooting, communicating, all of that can be effectively trained. Now, the strength piece, we are DNA genetically bound differently. I absolutely agree with that. Now, with that being said, we also bring different skills, different soft skills, different capabilities that I think balances out in a way. And I speak from experience. I used to, after I got out of doing the CST program, I ran my own intel firm. I still have the firm. It's just a cybersecurity company now. And our focus was leveraging women with these capabilities of, either they were trained in SWAT or they came from the CST program or something similar. The reason being is that maybe we can't drag a 250-pound man off the field, off the combat field, off the X, but I can guarantee it, David, I would be able to get in access and placement 100% easier than the guy that probably could drag that 250-pound body off. So I think what we need to do as a community is start looking at, instead of looking at where we're failing, is looking at the positive that having a woman on a team can actually bring to the team. And I know this because I wrote a white paper about it, and I asked women, how did you contribute to being on the Rangers missions or being on the village stability operations? And across the board, having a woman on their team increased overall mission success by 30% easily, because we were able to get more information. We were able to get access and placement. So I think some of these are are valid, but I don't think they're all valid. And I think with proper training, you can eliminate a lot of those concerns that are brought up.
Do you think that civilians who might feel that way, where they're staunch, like, well, there shouldn't be women in combat roles, or there shouldn't be women in any risky role, do you think it's really just it's not coming from a place of malice, but more of ignorance?
I would want to know the age group that's saying that, because I feel like that's a boomer age group, in my opinion, of like still wanting women to be barefoot and pregnant. And I say that tongue in cheek, but it's a lot of times they're like, well, women still need to just have desk jobs, or women don't need to be in these positions. Why? Why wouldn't we? I mean, we're seeing it across the board. The numbers don't lie. And I find a lot of times it is ignorance, but it is that age differentiation. I'm finding that individuals within our age or even younger, they're starting to see that women are, I mean, we are equals, but differently. Like, there are things that we can bring to the table that males can't bring to the table. And it's unfortunate. I think we're always, not always, but I think we're still going to have a challenging road with getting the males on board, because as you know, it just takes time. It takes usually 20 years for a new generation, new culture to come in and shift. And now that women are in combat roles, I think it's just going to take time. It's going to take that 10 to 20 years, get more women in these executive leadership roles, even in the military, into more of these soft roles. And then I think the naysayers are going to stop being naysayers.
I want to transition now into the Jax Act, and leading up to that, when did you decide personally that it was time for you to go, that your time in the military, you felt like you'd done enough and you wanted to move on?
So I serve in the reserves now. So, but my
Okay.
active, I was like, I'm going to do my reserve time and get out. But I got out of the SF community it was about 2021. I stepped out. And the reason that I had stepped out is I actually started getting really career focused. I did my last deployment in 2019 to support Atlantic Resolve, and I was supporting SOCYR, doing cyber and electronic warfare operations out there. And I was just at a point, I was actually really exhausted of continuously fighting for a seat at the table, because it's still, you can't, as a woman in the space, and then you're not a tab individual. I had felt like I was still trying to find a seat at the table, knowing what my credibility was. And I was reaching a point that I just wanted to really focus on me, also self-improvement. I was in a bad place in my life in like 18. I'd lost everything, hit rock bottom, a lot of depression, a lot of PTS. And so in 19, I was like, something has to change. And I think one of those things was the decision, I think subconsciously, I was like, I need to probably close this chapter in my life. As much as I still want to do these things, I think I'd realized that it's time for the younger generation. It's their turn. Let's focus on my career. So I did that pivotal change in 19, and I decided to move into the reserves and focus on just cybersecurity. And that's what I do now. I'm like, I still love, and I still talk to a lot of my soft family. I work in a nonprofit, and that's the Jax Act with the Special Operations Association of America. So I still kind of have my hand within the soft community, but it was just my time. And I think you'll see a lot of soft operators do that. If they're being real with themselves, they just realize, okay, it's probably time for me to move on and do something new and close that chapter.
Yeah, I mean, from what, again, I don't know because I've never done it, but from what virtually everyone I interview tells me, that the stress rate, you mentally, you just can't, your brain is not meant to be handled that. For some of these guys, you're talking 20 years, 25 years. That's a long time of high stress on your brain. So you said you struggled with PTSD. What'd you do for someone who's listening to this, that maybe they're struggling from PTSD? For you, what was your avenue to getting help with that?
It was a myriad of different things. There was one not a one size fit all. It was like, I quit drinking. Like, I won't say I'm completely sober, but it's not something I do on a regular basis anymore. But that was definitely one thing. I've got into therapy, realizing that you're not weak for asking for help. I started doing a ton of spiritual work, meditation, mindset work, and really giving back to myself and creating like healthy boundaries in my life. It was an absolute struggle to get out of it, and I still battle with it on a regular basis, but I'm 100% better than I was in 2018 and 2019 to where I'm at today, but I can honestly contribute it to getting into mindset, spiritual work, and just really reflecting and releasing some of those traumas, some of those things that I witnessed during that time in my life.
Do you think there's something to be said where if someone hears another person who's been through the same experience and say, hey, it's okay to go get help, do you think that the more people who come out and say that, it will lead to more and more people? Because there's strength in numbers. You don't want to be the only one. But if you know other people are doing it, now you might feel comfortable. Do you think that's accurate?
Absolutely, 100%. And I think, too, that there's this factor of you hear these stories when you're in this pain and you're in this dark space. You hear these stories, but you feel so alone. And it's so hard to explain. I had a friend that we actually got him into an inpatient clinic recently. And I remember the thing, I would reach out to him regularly and he reached out for help. And we were able to help get him into a clinic. But one of the things he just kept telling me over and over and over again is that he was so lonely, even though he knew he had the loving support and he had individuals like me and Soa and other people that had been there and been in combat and understood what he was going through. It's so hard to really believe that when you're in that dark place. So if anybody's listening to this and you're in that dark place right now and you're like, Bo, you don't know what I'm going through. Maybe not, maybe I don't, but you're not alone. And that's what you really have to believe, that you're not alone. And there are programs and there are people out there that want to be able to help you. And it's challenging because it's hard to sometimes get access to those programs to be able to receive that help, but you can't quit fighting. That's the biggest thing I learned is I've been years of fighting for my mental health, and it wasn't an easy journey to get here. I wish it was, but it was really, really hard. And it literally took me just being super resilient, continuously bouncing back.
Well, I think that your message of, like you said, being resilient, hopefully someone hears this and maybe, who knows, someone who's struggling right now might hear the message you're sharing and they might take that step to get help themselves. And I hope they do. If they are, and if you are, please do that. Now, I want to talk about the Jax Act. That is inspired by you. Could you explain to the audience how it came to be and what the entire purpose of it is?
Absolutely. And everybody listening, vote for the Jax Act. Call your senator, please. And so the Jax Act actually started initially because and this is very common for females in the military and especially CST. So I was battling with getting recognition for the injuries that I had incurred in combat. And there were several times I had to go through what was called a formal investigation. So it's where you provide all of your documentation and everything. And for the National Guard, you have to get a line of duty and all of this. And I went from active duty to the Guards. There's all these like skewed lines. And long story really short, I had already gone through the process of getting a line of duty and having to go through a formal investigation. So in 2018, I had a really bad car accident as I was leaving a military school. So I was on military orders. And up to this point, I had all these like small TBIs along the way from my combat deployment, falling off walls, like explosions. I was manning the saw, like all of these things. And a saw is like a mini machine gun. So I was like all these things leading up to it. Okay. Then I had a car accident while I'm leaving a military school. I'm on military orders. I get T-boned 45 miles an hour by an SUV. Head gets bashed in to the driver's side. I lose consciousness. Like all this stuff happened. So I have all this documentation, and then I have all the documentation from all my combat injuries. And I go and deploy like shortly after the accident. And now I am going to the TBI clinic in Germany in Landstuhl. And I'm working, but I'm going through the TBI clinic for like a year. And I come back, fast forward, start trying to submit all my paperwork, get everything taken care of. It's 2020 now. They're putting me through the ringer, trying to like get this as a TBI, get my disability claim. And then it was January and I'm like speeding up. So January of this year, what year are we in? 23. So it's 22, I think. Yeah, I think it was, it's 22. Yeah. So 22, January 22. At this time, I've been working with a congressional office just for me. All I want is to get a line of duty. That is it. And it's not really moving. So then it was a Thursday, November of 22. and I meet with one of the reps from Congressman ISIS office. So sitting there and I'm sharing my story, and she's like, well, I'm telling her about the CST program. I'm telling her that it's not just me, like these challenges happen for all the CSTs. And I explained to her why. And a lot of the challenges is because the VA, there's only 310 of us, David, that went through this entire program and then deployed. So when you go into the VA and you try to explain to them, it's not like saying I'm a infantry soldier.
Right.
They get that. But if you try to say I'm a CST, and so I'm likely going to have these injuries, they have no idea what a CST is, nor are they, like, in my opinion, from my experience, like interested in understanding what a CST is. So I got told in January of last year I would have to go through another formal investigation to prove that my TBI was combat related, and I kind of just lost it. I forwarded the email to the founder of SOA, Special Operations Association of America, which I'm a board member for, and I'm like, this is what I'm having to deal with, and other CSTs have to deal with this as well. So November, I'm sharing this story again. This is all just about me. I'm just trying to get a line of duty. And then she goes, this needs to change. Like, we need to see change for all of the CSTs. And so fast forward, she got her office where she's an aide for Congressman ISIS. She got Congressman ISIS involved in this. And now fast forward, we have an act out called the Jax Act that would help the 310 CSTs that went through the program pass and deploy to CSTs to help them receive the disability that they have not only earned, but deserve, and the recognition that they deserve as combat veterans. And one of the ways that we would be doing it is providing them a combat identifier that, in hopes that when we go into the VA, we leverage like the Jax Act or in the identifier that we have to now be able to write our narrative within the VA instead of the VA writing our narrative before we can even say anything. Because the key here too, just to add to that, when I walk into the VA, they don't see me as a special operations warrant officer that did all this really cool stuff. All they see is as a cyber electronic warfare officer. And then I have to explain, even though they've seen I went to air assault school and I went to this school and I went to that, and they don't comprehend that. And so we're hoping that through the Jax Act and this identifier, it empowers these CSTs to be able to go in and be able to get some of the disability that they deserve, because these women have served. They've given some, as you know, many of them like paused their life to go and serve in these roles, and now they're having to fight. And I know some CSTs that are in tens of thousands of dollars of debt for legal fees, and they still hold a 0% disability because they're battling with the VA on appeals just to prove that they deserve their disability claims.
That's absolutely infuriating on so many different levels. And I have no doubt everyone watching this feels the exact same way. So let me ask this. How close is this bill to becoming a law, and what's the progress of it?
So it's actually been through the House and Senate, but so it went before the NDAA, and some may know that we had like 15,000 amendments in the NDAA. It was something crazy like that. And so this was one of them. It didn't make it, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to still make it into law. What they're doing is I heard yesterday we had a board meeting with SOA. One of the key things is some of the terminology needs to be tweaked. It is a bipartisan bill. There is still strong support from both parties on both sides. So that's great. And now just typically it takes, just to keep in mind, it takes usually 3 years to get a bill enacted. So we were about to do it in less than a year if it had been picked up in the NDA, because it started last November. So I think we're still on track, but I am being serious. If anybody has a senator, if they can call them and tell them we support the Jax Act, that'll just only help our mission to be able to get this passed.
I hope, again, if you're listening to this, call your congressman, call your senator. That's crazy to me. So are you, legally speaking, on the paperwork, because you said they don't identify you as a combat veteran, so the eyes of the Veterans Affairs hospital or whatever it's called, you're not considered a combat veteran even though you were in multiple direct action in combat deployments? That's insane.
I know. Right. It is. A lot of that also has to do with a couple of things. We have this document, it's called the DD-214. And when you go to a deployment or you get out of the military, you get a DD-214. And when you look at our DD-214, unless you understand like what you're reading, you're like, okay, in Afghanistan during this time, attached to this, you probably did that. You're not going to be able to put those pieces of the puzzle together. It doesn't specifically say, was a cultural support team, in combat, got shot at, like all of those factors. So that's one thing. The other challenge is for a lot of the CSTs that were in and went through the program before like 2015 and 16, that was before women were allowed in combat roles. So that's another challenge, is that you're sitting there with a VA individual and you're trying to explain that in 2011 and 2012, I did all these things in combat, but women weren't allowed in combat roles. So it's the other challenge that you're facing. And it's, even though you want to try to educate, I know from firsthand experience, it's nearly impossible. It's been impossible for me, for them to kind of understand and grasp, okay, this woman sitting in front of me, I don't see physical external wounds, so she must be okay. And there's no way that she was in combat. She did all of these things because, I mean, they weren't in combat at the time, and she's a cyber warrant officer. It's crazy. It's wild.
I'm absolutely pulling for you, and maybe down the road after it passes, you can come back on and update everyone about the passage of the bill. I got one last question for you. If there's a young woman watching this, maybe they're a high school student, maybe they're early in college and they don't like college and they want to give the military a shot, and they want to be as close to the enemy, they want to look the enemy right in the eye. Is the CST still a viable option? What would you tell young women who are eager to be rolling with special operations up close and personal with the enemy? Where can they go?
So the CST program actually was dissolved when we did the withdrawal out of Afghanistan. So it was actually operational up until that point. And I'm biased to the Special Forces Green Berets. So if I could start over and hit the reset and be 20 again, that's where I would go. And that's what I would tell anybody, is I would want to work with them all over again. Now, you've got other options nowadays. You could go infantry. That's an option. You can go Rangers. You don't have to go Special Forces Green Berets. I think MARSOC and the other branches have also opened up the selection process to women, but I say do it. I wish it was available to me. I would have 100% done it if it was available to me in my 20s. I know for a fact, because that's what I remember, walking into the recruiters and asking those questions, but it wasn't my time. But I will tell you, the CSTs that went before, and we trailblazed. We weren't well accepted. We had a lot of adversity, but you had amazing leaders leading and really blazing this trail for the women to be able to now have this opportunities to be able to go forth and do great things in this space.
Jax, could you tell the audience real quick where they can go to read more about you, read more about the Jax Act? If you have anything you want to shout out for the audience, feel free.
Yeah, I'm a nerd, so I have a link tree. If anybody knows Linktree at all, Outpost Grade, that actually has like a link to the Jax Act. But the other thing is LinkedIn, Jax, JXS. Find me there, or IamJax.me. You can find me there as well. I'm pretty easy to find. Just type in Jax Scott, Google. You'll pretty much find me. Yeah. My social media footprint is not very concealed.
Well, hey, I'd like to say a huge thank you, and I'm serious. I hope you join me again down the road when this bill passes, and we'll get an update at that time. How's that sound?
I love it, David. Thank you. This has been amazing. I was really honored to be on your show. Thank you for having me.